Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Uncensored CMO. Now in this episode, we're talking about one of my all-time favourite subjects, which is innovation. And who better to talk about it with than Mauro Porcini, who's the Chief Design Officer at PepsiCo. And he's also the author of an incredible book called The Human Side of Innovation. And I genuinely recommend it. It's absolutely fascinating. We're recording it in his office, which is, let's be honest, is pretty cool, as you'd expect. And we're talking about what does it take to make innovation that succeeds? And importantly, what characteristics of people can make innovation that works? And he really knows, because if you've read the book, there are 24 characteristics that he talks about that are essential to what he calls the unicorn of innovation. This is one of the most energizing, fascinating, and impressive conversations I've ever had. Here it is. Mauro, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, or I don't know if I should say thanks for having me, or I'm glad I'm having you in my office.
I know,
today,
this
right?
is great. We've come to you. But I've got to say, for everyone listening, I mean, everyone who's watching might get a bit of an idea by the background, but you've got a really cool office, I have to say. I guess, your Chief Design Officer, you probably deserve a good office, right? And people expect
But actually,
something.
More than deserving, everything that surrounds us, the way you dress, your body language, and therefore also your office, your house, the books you read, the friends you have, everything is telling a story about you. Yeah. So the design of this office, we took this office, it was just, the space was just a raw space, there was nothing, just column and the floor. The design of this office was a tool to build the culture of design in the company, in PepsiCo. I used to work at 3M, same thing. We built the design center as a platform to tell a story about the new creative approach of the company. So for us, so to our own employees, management, and then obviously customers, journalists, shareholders, anybody passing by these offices. And we're both at the time of 3M and now in PepsiCo, like, wait a second, wow, I mean, I didn't expect this from this company.
Exactly. Now, I can't wait to get into it, because you and I have got an unusual parallel for our careers. So I spent from 1997 to 2012 working at Britvic, which is the franchise, the Pepsi franchise in the UK. And I think you started, I left in July 2012. And I think you started...
Exactly, July 2012. Yeah.
There we go. And, you're overseeing design globally for PepsiCo, which is an incredible role. And my role was actually, I created a joint venture with Pepsi where we launched innovation in the UK and kind of nurtured it. It was a really fascinating time, and it was very, very special. So one of the best times of my career. So I look back fondly. So a lot of the brands that you talk about, I remember launching some of them in the UK. So it's great. So I can't wait to get into that. But... tell me how you got into design in the first place, and what led you to Pepsi?
I got in design by coincidence, randomly. As a kid, I had two dreams. I wanted to either be an author, I love writing, or I wanted to be an artist. And my parents had a role in this. My mom was working in finance, but she hated it, and she left when she was 38. And I remember her growing up, when I was growing up, writing every day, writing and reading a lot. And I loved that. And my father was an architect, not very successful. He was teaching then technical drawings in high school, but his passion was painting, and he would paint every single day. And so writing and painting would come easy to me. Then I had these role models, and I loved it. So that's what I wanted to do. The problem is that I was coming from a humble family. We were not very wealthy. And so it was already a miracle that I could study in public university in Italy. And so I needed to find a job after university. I needed to choose a career path that would give me that kind of opportunity. And so I decided to study architecture. And a few days before doing the exam to enter architecture, a friend of mine called me and told me, in the Faculty of Architecture in Politecnico of Milan, they just opened a new faculty within architecture called design. Actually, it was called industrial design, disegno industriale in Italian. And I was like, this is interesting, because it's mixing this idea of design and therefore art and creativity with industrial, something new, commercial. So maybe I'm going to have more opportunities to find a job easily. So a very pragmatic approach, but still driven by my passions and my dreams. And so long story short, I did the exam. It went really, really well. I entered, and then That's what I did. I studied 5 years design in Milan, and I did my thesis on wearable technologies with Philips. And Philips was the first company I worked for immediately after.
Amazing. So how did you get from doing Philips? You were at 3M for quite a number of years, weren't you? And then you end up at a drinks company, effectively, obviously PepsiCo, famous for drinks. What led you to this point?
Look, 1 year in Philips, I had for 3 years my own agency working on digital. There was something that was not part of my background. I'm an industrial designer by background. That's what I studied at school, very focused on innovation. So I had to reinvent myself working in digital and trying to figure out in the early 2000s the digital technologies in the world of web and in entertainment. It was a specific kind of agency. Anyway, 3 years there, and then 3M, 10 years of 3M, again, reinventing myself in a big multinational corporation, but this time building a capability from scratch. And in these years, so I'm mentioning these experiences because even though they're really different, an agency, a tech company, a food and beverage company, starting in Italy, ending up in the United States, there was a common trait. And this common trait was the idea of innovating in a meaningful way for people. So trying to create value, trying to create something that nobody ever did before, and really driven by this focus of creating value for people, focusing on their needs, their wants, their dreams. And then, yes, then you also need to make money with this for these companies. You need to make sure that you build the right ecosystem, infrastructure, everything around it to enable this kind of innovation. But the dream, the passion, the drive was all focused by creating something new, unique, and meaningful to people. And this, you can do it from a small company, from a big, from an agency, from anywhere. And this is the common trait.
Yeah. Now you believe this so much that you've written a book about it as well, which I've just finished, which I have to say is absolutely fascinating. And you really emphasize the importance of human at the heart and people who love people. So explain, what is it about being focused on people that's so important from an innovation point of view?
But look, let me start from a more practical reason. We live in a world today that is very different than the one of just 20 years ago. Today, anybody can come up with an idea, get easy access to funding through the proliferation of investment funds and different kind of entities looking for the next big idea to build the next startup. So for a kid getting out of school, the idea of building a startup today is plausible. 30 years ago was crazy. I mean, very few could do it, and that even the idea of doing it. The cost of producing that idea is now going down, driven by globalization, new technologies, and a variety of different things happening in society, in the market today. And then you can go straight to your consumers, users, to people, to those humans, to sell them stuff through e-commerce and to promote your brands and create your brands through the digital platforms, social media, and so on. So essentially, these were the areas where the big corporations used to build their big barriers to entry, made of scale, of production, communication, and distribution. Now, these barriers to entry now are crumbling down in a society that is very different from the past. And so both the big companies and the small one are left with just one option, focusing on people and creating the best possible products and solutions for them. Actually, the product is part of the solution. Product, packaging, communication, service. You need the best of the best of the best, because it's enough that you have one area of weakness and eventually your competitors will come exactly from there. Something was not real, was not happening in the same way in the past, because there was this form of dynamic balance between competitors, in these industries. And there were also certain constraints, costs, infrastructure that were common to all these players. Today, a startup doesn't have eventually many of the constraints of the big corporations. They're more agile, they can come in and really create problems for you. So long story short, for the first time in modern history, financial value is finally aligning to human value. And so the best competitive advantage you can build for your company is a culture of human centricity. It's people that are genuinely in love with the people they serve. Not because it's a slogan, not because it's good to say, and maybe you win, some kind of awards or some, recognition with the media. No, you need people that really really authentically believe in this. Yeah. And it's interesting, I'm a designer, and this is typical of the design community. When you study design in university or school, they teach you to observe people and understand their needs, their wants, and fall in love with those needs and wants and create the best possible solutions for them. Then they tell you, by the way, you also need to make sure you make money with them, and you also need to make sure you know how to make them. So these are the three lenses of design thinking. Desirability, understanding people and create something valuable for them. And then viability, understanding your business model. And feasibility, understanding your technologies, your processes, and so on and so forth. And you mix the three different dimensions to create the most meaningful solutions. But you are driven by this idea of creating something amazing for people. You look at people like if they were your kids, your parents, your friends. You want to surprise them. Your career as a designer will grow if you create something meaningful for people. If you are in business, and now I'm going to be a little bit provocative because most of the people listening to us are marketers and people in business, they teach you something different. They teach you to grow a business. And this is very valuable for any company, right? You want people that know how to grow these businesses. And they teach you that you have different levers to grow this business. You have the product, you have communication, you have pricing, promotion, you have all these levers you are all very familiar with, marketers of the world and business leaders of the world. Now, if you are really, really good as a marketer, even if you have a mediocre product, because that's the nature of the industry, the nature of your company, if you know how to use the other levers, you can grow that business exponentially, or you could grow that business exponentially in the past. And you will become a great business star, and your career will grow together with the business that is growing, even if your product is mediocre. Today, everything is completely different. If you have a product that is mediocre, if you have something that doesn't work in the system, if you're not really creating human value for people, you're not going to be able to grow the financial value. Yeah. So just to close, we need to take something that is so spontaneous and natural in the world of design, that is this love for the people we serve, and spread it across all the other communities. But not just as a slogan. I met so many business leaders that are like, oh yeah, we love human centricity. We need to build purposeful brands. But they still see that as a lever for growth. Yeah. Instead, you need to be driven by this desire, this passion, this idea that you're going to create value because that's the right thing to do. Because you love to do that. Because it's the right thing to do for those people, for the world, for our society, for our planet. You want to do that. Then marketers know how to grow the businesses much better than designers. So if you bring that culture and you combine with the ability to grow the business, then you're going to create something really powerful for these companies. Yeah. But once again, this is not wishful thinking. Today, human value is finally aligning with financial value because you don't have those barriers to protect your mediocrity anymore.
Yeah, I love that so much. And you're right, as marketers, we really forget about the product P so much, don't we? We're focused on promotion. Marketers spend so much time thinking about promoting what they've got and not enough time, on how good is the product, is it meeting needs? I love that. That's really good. The other thing I want to talk to you about is why so many innovations fail. Why do you think it is? I mean, the statistics are crazy, aren't they? Like 8 or 9 out of 10 innovations don't succeed. I mean, I'll give an example because when I was working over at Britvic and I was managing, I worked out that in a 10-year period, 80% of our growth had come from basic innovation, products that didn't exist 10 years ago. And yet we were spending hardly any of our time on those brands. And I suddenly had a realization that the problem was, and in fact, you mentioned this in the book, which really made me smile when you said you're coming up with a new idea, and you said we couldn't get it on the calendar. Yeah. And it really struck me because I was fighting a battle to get the innovation that Britvic and Pepsi had worked on into the calendar. I thought, this is crazy. We're just not getting on there. So I tried to convince the business to get behind it, and I thought, let me look at the statistics for innovation. So I just took, over 10 years, the top 20 innovation. And what I realized is that took a look at the first year sales. that 80% of it was actually just brand extension. It was like, Coke Zero, I think, was the top of the charts in the UK at the time. So very, very, very few new brands ever cut through in year one, on the calendar, as it were, sort of thing. The second thing I discovered, which completely shocked me, is that half of those declined in year two. So even the very best, taking the top 20, half of them had gone down in value the next year. And then what I realized, which really led me to think how we do innovation, is that all the ones that then I looked at which brands were successful after 10 years. And the list was completely different. So if you looked at 1 year's success versus 10 year, they were completely different. None of them had appeared on the list in the first year. And what I realized, there are brands like Red Bull, for example, and Fever Tree tonics, and all these brands started small. And they started in businesses where it was the only thing they did, rather than kind of multinational companies that were trying to, fit something in the calendar. So what I found at the time is the only way I could make it work was to in the end, I did a joint venture with Pepsi, between Pepsi and Britvic, where we actually, rather than spend the money on promotion, I took the $6 million I think we had, not a lot, but it was $6 million. I said, let's not spend that on advertising. Let's put that into a separate team, that our own van sales team, our own brand managers, our own innovation managers, our own, we even had a merchandising team that used to go in and make sure that it was on the shelf in the right place and it had all the right branding around it, sort of thing. But we managed it from, the factory all the way through to the store, and we focused in London. I think we had 6 cities that we focused on. So we thought, if we can win the major metropolitan cities, and then we can grow out from there, sort of thing. But it took that kind of complete innovation in organization and how we got to market for it to stick. It's completely different.
You were talking, I was thinking about so many different things. Let's start from the first thing you say, that why so many innovations fail. Depending on the stats you look at, is between 70 to 85, 90% of innovation that fail in market. So you spend so much time, efforts, part of your career as a business leader, working on a project, and it fails. The first thing there is to stop calling them failure. I used to work in a science-driven company, so I would interact every day with tons of scientists. For a scientist, it's very clear that to arrive to one patent, you need to do thousands of experiments. They will never call those experiments failure. Oh my God, I made a failure. Like, imagine, they ask you to invent a cure for cancer and they give you 6 months. That's the deadline. It needs to be successful. And if you make an experiment that doesn't work, that's a failure. Yeah. That's a mistake. So in innovation, we need to experiment. Now, to experiment, you need to build the right financial algorithm to carve out financial space to make those experiments. You need to build a culture within the organization that doesn't crucify the people that are running experiments, blaming them for the failure, but understanding that it's an experiment. You need a system and processes and tools to extract as much data and insights out of those experiments/failures so that you can reapply the learning to the next project. And you need to build also a communication, a storytelling to make sure that consumers, shareholders, customers, the media understand that you are making experiments and you're not just systematically failing. So that's the first part of the answer. Then in innovation, look, these companies, essentially any company in CPG, they really focus on the quarter by quarter, year by year approach, for all the reasons that we're all very familiar with. If you start to look in consumer electronics or in tech, with my past, the horizon become longer for a simple reason, because it's driven by the technology platform, by the technology pipeline. So they know that to a specific kind of innovation technology, you need more time, and that drives their horizon and their thinking. But in general, we need to introduce in these companies the ability to think of the future. I did my thesis, as I told you, on wearable technologies with Philips, and both, in that project, as well in the first year that I did in Philips, we will work on what the society will look like in 20 years. Yeah. So that's how I started everything. And I thought that every company, every industry will work like this, and they don't. So now imagine food and beverage, packaged good in general. every company should think of how society is going to look in 20 years. Society in general. Then how food and beverage, how my industry is going to look there. And you start to design this. And this is something that maybe your strategy team does it, but you don't have a design team that most of the time doing it. Meaning that you work with strategy, with marketing, with R&D, and you start to build scenarios of what society and the food and beverage industry will look like in 20 years, with the humans at the center of everything. You prototype, you create, you validate, you evolve, tweak. Once you have a clear vision of where you want to go, that vision is going to inform 4 things in your company: your acquisitions, your new ventures and partnerships, quick cycle innovation, so quick experiments. Eventually, many of them will be those, just evolution of existing products and brands. Those are easy because, especially if you have brands with big scale, like in our case, those variations may generate a lot of revenue very quickly and create the newness and that excitement that people are looking for. And then the 4th investment is breakthrough innovation. That innovation that is longer term, where you need to identify some real valuable competitive advantage, and usually it's technology driven. Now, the challenge in this breakthrough innovation is the timing that you mentioned. Yeah. In companies where marketers and many people in the business functions rotate every 2-3 years, it's really difficult to have a team that is able to work on that kind of horizon. So the challenge is, and we don't have a solution yet, but what we're thinking, discussing, is how can I rebuild the mindset of the entrepreneur? You mentioned, some of these brands, they were run by entrepreneurs. Yeah. And so the mindset of entrepreneurs is the mindset of somebody deeply in love with the people they're serving, deeply in love with the product, with the brand. Is everything they're doing. They think about this 24/7, 7 days a week. And it's not just about coming up with a vision, creating an amazing strategy, a beautiful product. You launch it and, okay, now it will work out. Or anyway, I have 9 to 5, I go to work, I make it work, whatever. In 1 year, I'm going to have my next job as CMO of Pepsi or a CMO of Lay's or of God knows what other brand in other companies. How can you have people engage in the long run? How can you reward them as they would be rewarded if they were entrepreneurs? As an entrepreneur, you know that if you do it right, you can become a millionaire, a billionaire. You can become one of those Elon Musk and Zuckerberg, out there. So how can you rebuild similar incentive? You're not going to become probably Elon Musk, but how can I incentivize you in ways that would be impossible with a normal rewarding structure? So these are some of the considerations, but we need to change the way we do innovations in these companies. Even acquisitions are becoming more and more difficult because of what you said earlier. Do you have this spike? Everybody's talking about this product, this brand, and then after 1 or 2 years, at that point when everybody's talking about the value is inflated, after 1 or 2 years, it goes down. Totally. So it's even safer to develop it from inside. But again, I think this model with 4 different dimensions is the right balance of all the different things.
That's really good. It's a bit like the old Clayton Christensen book, The Innovator's Dilemma, isn't it? Is that it's always better in the short term to do the incremental innovation, the extra flavour. Whereas long term, it's always better to do the breakthrough innovation. It's like how you balance the two. Because the time frame you look changes everything. This is what I was explaining to Britvic is they used to say to me, but one gondola end of Pepsi in Tesco, the biggest supermarket in the UK, would sell more than a whole year of my Pepsi Raw or Gatorade or Mountain Dew, whatever I had in my portfolio. And I said, well, what happens in 10 years' time? Because in 10 years' time, I worked out that 80% of all our growth would come from not Pepsi, because Pepsi was already very well established and was growing at 3 or 4% a year. But getting people to change their time horizon when you've got like quarterly dividends to pay and you've got an annual bonus to pay. So a lot of it comes down to incentive, doesn't it? It's how do you change the people incentive to get them to do the right?
It's incentive and it's culture. So for the many people listening to us and thinking, well, I can't go to my CEO or to our finance team and change incentive tomorrow. So what do? I don't do it. Well, what we've been doing, for instance, with this design team in PepsiCo for years is to build the right culture of these innovators. I call them the unicorns, people that are deeply in love with this idea of changing the world, of changing the company, changing the industry, but ultimately changing the world. So that kind of people, they are not driven by, I need the next position, I need that kind of reward or incentive, but are driven by creating something really meaningful, really cool, really, that is changing the world. So that's the first step. Do you have those kind of people in your team? What are the characteristics of these people? You mentioned the book that I wrote, The Human Side of Innovation. I talk about these 24 different characteristics of these people. And so finding these people is a first step, making sure that your team and your cross-functional team, also the other functions, have that kind of people is the first step. Then, again, as a company, as a corporation, you cannot rely just on that. So incentive and these kind of tools are really, really important for a sustainable, approach in time to innovation. But the way to start is that.
Yeah, I think you're on something, because every kind of consultant I've ever worked with comes in and changes the process, doesn't it? It's all about the process. In fact, I can tell you the very moment I decided to leave Britvic. And we had his monthly, it's called the Activity Executive was the name. It was a very boring title. But anyway, but we had up to 100 projects going through the system at any one time. And I was one of about 25 people in this executive. We'd have a whole day. And at the end of the day, I realized all we had done is manage the process. Were all of those projects on time, done to the right standard, engaged aligned the right people, allocated the right resource, ticked the right boxes? And I sat there and went, we haven't asked ourselves, is the idea any good? I just had this I don't want to be the person that just manages the process. I want to make something special and do something great. And anyway, that weirdly, that was the meeting that I sat there and thought, maybe it's time for me to challenge myself and become an entrepreneur, rather than sit here kind of moving the sort of resources around the table. But we talk so much about process, but what I love about your book is it's about the people, isn't it? Now, I'd love to talk to you about this, because I don't think I've read a book before that has 24 characteristics in your list of what you're looking for. So you must be the toughest interview ever. But talk through the elements of that, because I love how you frame the entrepreneurial skills, the social skills, and the enabling skills. You break it down beautifully. But give us a sense of some of the characteristics that make up a successful innovator.
Look, some of them are more obvious than others. For instance, the ability to dream, to think big. We're all born with that ability, by the way. As kids, we dream. I have a 2-year-old daughter, and she's there fantasizing every day. You dream, and then at a certain point, society starts to tell you, starting with your families, often the dreaming is childish. Yeah. But you keep dreaming, you go to school, university, and you arrive to these companies, and some of us still dream. You dream that you can change the brand, the company, the function, that industry eventually, and then once again, very soon, people will remind you that dreaming is childish, that you should just, get to the ground, be practical. Some of them will even tell you how arrogant it is from you to think that you can change this company has been like this forever, or this brand has been like this forever. And so at a certain point, you start to think that they are right and you are wrong, and you stop dreaming. So many people stop dreaming. And so the first truth is, don't stop dreaming. Think big. Think big. Then dreaming is not enough. There are few people that dream and they live in the comfort of the dream. You need to find a way to then land the dream, to execute, to make things happen. And so the unicorn is somebody that knows how to balance these two dimensions, the ability to dream, but also the ability to make things happen. Now, in innovation, this is pretty obvious. It's rare to find, and people don't talk enough about this. And in companies, we don't talk enough about this double skill and double ability. But again, if you talk about innovation, obviously you need to do these two things. But there are other characteristics that have been really, really important for me personally, my personal journey, and for us as a team, as a design team. There are 3 over all of them that then you can reconnect to many others. One is kindness, one is optimism, and one is curiosity. Let's start with the less obvious, kindness. Kindness in a corporation, in the business world.
Surprising.
What?
Yeah.
I mean, they taught us all this time that actually you need to be tough, that the sharks are the ones succeeding. I mean, there is management schools that talk about putting people against each other, and with a Darwinian kind of way, the strongest, the fittest will succeed. This was true. I don't think that was true even in the past, but it was more understandable in the past when you didn't need the kind of efficiency, productivity that you need today in this world where those barriers to entry we were talking about earlier are down. Today you need teams to work in full synergy in the most effective possible way. And so kindness, that I wish it was enough, you need nice, kind people in any kind of community, but I wish that was enough. But even if it's not, kindness is an amazing way to connect people, to build these synergies. If you have in your team people that are not kind to you, that don't care about you, you're not going to trust them. If you don't trust them, you're going to do all kinds of activities to protect yourself. Now, multiply these activities for 300,000 people, the number of people we have in PepsiCo, and understand the level of inefficiency that you're building in your company through these redundant activities. This is lack of productivity that is invisible. Nobody talks about this. When you talk about productivity, you talk about cutting people, unfortunately, or cost of any kind. Nobody talks about investing in kindness. Imagine if you have a boss, your supervisor, that is not a kind, trustworthy people. If somebody actually is quite the opposite, what are the probability that when this person has a blind spot, is making a mistake, you're going to help this person? Yeah. Not very high. Let's say that you're really, really kind, you're going to do it anyway. What are the probabilities that this person wants to be helped by you? Very low. So all of this is building inefficiency. So kindness is an amazing driver of productivity. That's one. Quickly, briefly, optimism. If you innovate, you said it earlier, if you are in innovation and 80% of what you do fails, you need to be optimistic. Yeah. You need to look at the glass half full. You always need to think, appreciate the progress. And this has been very powerful for me over the years. I am an optimistic kind of person by nature, so that helps a lot. But still, no matter if you are or you're not, there are moments that are really, really tough. So what helped me was the ability to step back and look at the past and understand that where I am today is different than where I was in the past. And this is all progress. Even in the most difficult moments, actually, are moments where I grew, I learned, I became a better person, a better leader, a better designer. And then remembering the future, the goal, the vision. But you need to have the goal. You need to have the dream. Else, you're just in the middle of a tough moment, of a crisis, but you don't have the dream. And eventually, you are not able to appreciate where you're coming from. And then that's when you lose faith and you stop innovating. And then the last one, to close, is this curiosity, this insatiable curiosity that push you to travel, to read, to talk to people, talk especially with people different from you. Instead of fearing diversity, you embrace diversity because you know that in diversity there is the precious gift of knowledge, a different perspective. They know things, they see things in a way that is different than mine. So I can learn. And innovation is all about this, understanding things in a different way from your perspective, from your bias, is the ability to change perspective. So the more people you talk with that are different from you, the more the chances to evolve your perspective. The beauty, and I close, in a conversation, respectful conversation between two people that are different from one another, is that perspective number one of one person meets perspective number two, and through that respectful dialogue, you build the innovative perspective number three, that didn't exist before the conversation between individuals.
I love your 3 points. I was going to come back on them because they're absolutely brilliant. The kindness thing, I think, is so undervalued, because if I think of all the most destructive cultures I've worked in, they're those cultures where people think success is undermining other people or making other people look bad so that they look good. Whereas actually the best cultures are the ones where people will go out of their way to help them. So, if you fail, they'll come in and help you. Whereas I've been in situations where if you fail, instantly everyone disowns you. It's like immediately, it's like the old phrase, success has many fathers, but failure is an orphan. But actually, failure should attract people to go, how can we help? How can we make it better? How can we support you? And that kind of thing. And I love your optimism point, because the most, I think probably the best talk I've ever done in my life was, I just started at Suntory, which is the third biggest drinks business in the UK. And I just joined, and we were doing this kind of meet the exec thing with everyone in the company could sign up to come along and listen to one of the exec members talk. And the idea was to get closer to the people and share a bit about what we've learned on our journeys. And everyone else in the exec had their own function as the topic. So, the finance talked about how to read a P&L, or the salesperson talked about how to sell. And because I was new, they just gave me any topic I wanted. And I just read this amazing book called Black Box Thinking by Matthew Syed, that basically said when a plane crashes, the black box will give them such rich information about why the failure happened that future lives will be solved. Future lives will be saved, rather, because what you learn in a crash will save many, many crashes in the future. And so I decided, rather bravely, to do a talk on my 5 most epic failures.
Oh, no.
Now, this is the first time I'd spoken at the company in front of everybody. And in fact, the way they'd done it is you had to sign up to go and listen to the talk. And mine had been oversubscribed by like 3 or 4 times. It was absolutely packed. Everyone was like, why is this new guy going to talk about how he's failed? But the twist in the story, which you reminded me of, is that my biggest successes came after those failures. And that's what I don't think we value in companies enough, is that those people that experiment, they try, that they fail, what they learn in that failure is so valuable and actually makes future success possible. And I think we forget that. And then your curiosity point as well, I thought was fascinating, because when I was at Britvic doing we called it the seed brand team. So basically I ran the unit that had all the sort of future stars in, sort of thing. And I had a dawning realization that I was actually really lonely. Nobody else in the company knew what I was doing or had done what I was doing. I was kind of like on my own, kind of, forging this new kind of path. And what I did then is I started reaching out to other innovators or entrepreneurs. And I met a guy called Adam Morgan who wrote Eat the Big Fish. And he introduced me to his network, and I met lots of other people. But actually, I found that diversity of meeting challengers and startups and just networking outside the business suddenly gave me so much inspiration, because in an organization, you start to learn how things are done, and you start to think like everyone else. You start to try and, write the same calendars and do the same processes and even look the same way. You sort of become uniform, don't you? But innovation happens when you step out, and you go and meet people that are different to you, businesses that have got the same challenge but operate in entirely different sectors that are trying to, do life-saving or whatever, and that's where the inspiration comes.
Let me mention,
totally reminded me of that.
Totally agree. I mean, we have so many people that work from 9 to 5 or eventually from 7 to midnight just on those projects, on the company. They travel, they go from New York to London or to Tokyo, and you need to stay in the meeting room, talking about your business all the time. And if you get out of the meeting room, you need to justify yourself of why you went for dinner, in Tokyo, because you need to be productive and come back. And this is so bad for those people, but for the companies they work for. I always tell my team, when you travel to a city where you have never been, when you travel, especially on the other side of the world, take 1 extra day, pay by us, and get lost in the city. Go out, have fun, observe people, go to restaurants, exhibits, museums. I do it all the time with my teams. When I go to visit the 17 design teams around the world, there is the business reviews, all the typical meetings, but we always carve out half a day, 1 day, to go out together, to go to stores, to go to museums, to be inspired. And by the way, to also know each other in a better way. But again, it's so important to be exposed to different kind of thinking, different cultures, because those help you change in perspective. Now, if you need to, anyway, to be one of those unicorns, committed to the company, in love with your purpose, with your dream, or what you're trying to do with the company. If you have those kind of people, trust them, empower them, because the day they go out, in the city, or they read a book, in their vacations that have nothing to do with your company, when they meet other people, they're always thinking, how can what am I learning that I can take back to the business? And in the worst case scenario, when they come back from that trip, as an example, in the worst case scenario, they will come back with tons of more energy.
Yeah.
In the best case scenario, there will be an idea, an insight, something that they saw that is inspiring them to do things in a different way when they're back 100%. Here.
In fact, every successful innovation I've ever done has been when I haven't done my job. I've not been doing the thing that I'm supposedly paid for. It's always when I'm doing the thing that I'm not paid to do, whether it's going to go abroad and go to a conference or set up a podcast. I mean, I set this podcast up. No one asked me to do it. I just thought it'd be a great way of meeting interesting people and, kind of networking kind of thing. And that led to lots of success, but it was never the job, so you're right. You have to take yourself out of the environment, don't you? And put yourself somewhere else. Yeah. That's a key characteristic. Something that I observed actually in the way you talked about the 24 characteristics of successful innovators is how much of them balance this tension in them. And it's like you have to sort of be able to do both things. So, I mean, a few things that I picked up on there is like, you have to have vision, but also know how to execute. You have to be intuitive, but also analytical, or you have to take risks, but also know when to be cautious, or, see the big picture and see the detail. You also talked about being humble, but also confident as well, and those kind of things. And being in the short term and being in the long term and those sort of things. So there's something about being able to kind of, hold two things together, and being able to juggle the ambiguity and see, that balance those things, which I think is quite unique because we're trained to be, good at studying or good at art or good at, maths or good at, chemistry. But actually, you've got to blend those things together, isn't it? It's like the ability to do more than just one thing.
Look, if you read the ancient philosophers, all the answers to all our questions in life, they're already there. In philosophy, you find all the answers to everything. And one of the things that most of the philosophers understood already back then is that in balance, there is the solution to everything. Is literally finding the balance between polarizing elements, but without killing the polarization. You need that polarization, but you need to manage the tension. Yeah. I mean, you see also what's going on, in the political environment all around the world. In the United States, we're in the middle of the elections. There is this division, this polarization that is not managed in a meaningful way by creating respectful dialogue between the two different perspectives and point of views. The two point of views are against each other, not in a constructive way. So this is true, therefore, for everything we do as human beings, and therefore also in our business, in innovation, always finding a way to somehow balance different dimensions, put them in dialogue, understanding you personally, where you are really, really good and where eventually you have gaps or opportunities, weaknesses of any kind. But you need the awareness of those opportunities. You need to understand how to somehow create a dialogue with people that are really, really good in those areas where you're weak eventually or where you have a gap. And you need to build, therefore, a system around you, a team or a community of people that help you fill in those gaps. But you need to be a really good orchestra director, able to manage all these different dimensions. But it all starts with awareness. The reason why I decided to write down these characteristics already was something like 16, 17 years ago when I was at 3M. I wrote them down because the first step is being aware of what is important. If I, as a young person, I go to a company and they don't tell me that kindness is a superpower, I'm not going to practice it. Actually, quite the opposite. If they tell me that is the opposite, I'm going to do the opposite eventually. So if they don't tell me that humbleness combined with confidence is really important, I'm not going to do it eventually. So it was very, very important to build first awareness about these characteristics. Once you know that they are important, you invest in them. Many times, many people ask me, can you become a unicorn? Can you teach people? Can you coach people in becoming unicorns? I think, for talent in general, part of it is DNA, is natural. Like, You're born good at playing soccer or tennis or, good in sport, or eventually you're not very coordinated, you're not that good. So part of it is nature. But the other part is totally coachable, it's totally teachable. So, I mean, we can think about the IQ. The IQ, you're born with a certain IQ, but through coaching and training, you can raise your IQ. I didn't know, I discovered when I was doing research for the book. And the same, you could be born really good at soccer, but if you don't invest, you don't train, somebody that is less good than you probably is going to be better than you. Obviously, then if you're Messi and you train, you're going to be a superstar. But that's another story. So, but it all starts with awareness first. The second step is practicing. And then the third one is tweaking and evolving continuously. The problem when you have awareness and you practice and you become really, really good at doing something, you are a really good marketer, a really good innovation leader, or a good designer, is that you may fall in the trap of arrogance.
Yeah.
I made it. I'm a CMO of a big company. I'm a CDO of a big company. I made it. I know it all. The real leader, first of all, is the one of knowing, of not knowing, as Socrates used to say thousands of years ago. As that humbleness, that awareness that you're dust in the universe, and you have the opportunity to spend the rest of your life learning and learning and learning and bettering yourself, knowing that you will never become the unicorn I talk about, but enjoying the journey to learn more and more and more. So it starts with that, and then if you are that smart, you're gonna surround yourself with people that know better than you, that know more things or different kind of things. And so you will learn from them, and then you will build a synergy with them to work together to create something extraordinary as a team.
And mixing with people that are better than you rubs off, doesn't it? You just get inspired by them. It raises, you are the sum of the company you keep, really, aren't you? Which is, so find as good a people as you can.
But you need that confidence, right? You need that confidence and that humbleness to recognize their value, the confidence not to be afraid of that value. And now the confidence starts with, I think something very important is to invest in something. It could be, the knowledge of design, the knowledge of marketing. It could be some form of know-how. And then you practice and you build your skills and you become the best that you can, the best version of yourself in that specific thing. They will give you a lot of confidence. Yeah. And if you work in a corporation, it means that you're not gonna invest in becoming the best marketer in that company. You're gonna become the best marketer in the world. Your context is not the other marketers in the company. When I came to PepsiCo as a designer, my goal was not to do better design than what PepsiCo was doing before. My goal is to create the best design culture organization in the planet. It doesn't mean I'm gonna be able to do it, but that's the drive that I have. And that's really something that we're gonna give you motivation and inspiration for the rest of your life. Yeah. The bigger the goal, the more, the motivation. And again, even when you reach your goal, you have a very ambitious goal or a small goal, you reach that goal, the secret is to keep building new dreams. You use that achievement as a platform to jump higher and higher and higher and spend your life doing that.
I love that. So inspiring. You mentioned something earlier in your comment about balance. I think balance is something that we've forgotten about a lot. And it's interesting. I did at System 1, we've looked at tens of thousands of bits of innovation and measured the emotional response to them. And we found this interesting thing that the ideal innovation, or most successful innovation, balances element of surprise with an element of comfort. So we ended up with this kind of phrase that actually the optimum innovation is like 80% familiar, but 20% new. And the more breakthrough the innovation, the more familiar you need to try and make it. The more familiar the innovation, so like it's a new flavor of Pepsi, for example, the more new you need to make it feel. And I thought it's really interesting. We've actually... We're actually working on this thing at the moment, working out the ideal recipe for innovation based on kind of balancing, because as humans, we like familiarity. We like, we know what we know, don't we? We're kind of reassured by it. But equally, you need intrigue and novelty and surprise to kind of trigger that. And, we worked out this kind of optimum balance between the two. But yeah, balance is quite important, isn't it?
Yeah, and it all goes back, as you say, to human nature. I mean, you need that familiarity that is linked to the base of the Maslow pyramid. It's safety. Familiarity is safety. And then you move up the ladder, and then is all about self-expression, is connections with others, so the emotional connections, is enjoying life all the way to the top, the purpose that you're going to find for yourself in life. And so understanding how to create something that gives them the safety, the feeling of safety, but then solve all the other needs we have in the pyramid is really the secret. It's not easy. Also because those things change with society, with time. And so we need to be on top of what's going on in society. You may have a product and a brand that's been really successful in the early 2000s, and eventually today is not that relevant anymore. Yeah. So to be in tune with the people we serve is key. But then once again, you go back to having the right people in-house. They really care about the people they serve. The subtitle of the book, The Human Side of Innovation, the subtitle is The Power of People in Love with People. There are 3 dimensions of this love, and these summarize, everything. The first dimension is the love for the people you serve. So literally thinking of those consumers as your daughters, sons, parents, family members, and really caring about creating something good for them. The second form of love is the love for what you do. And there is tons of stats and researches that show that people that love, the successful people are people that love what they do. Because the love gives you resilience, optimism, the ability to go against all odds and overcome all kinds of roadblocks and difficulties. And the third form of love is the love for the people surrounding you. Is your teams, the people that are with you every day, so caring about them, being there for them, and really work together and enjoying loving, working with them. In a world where it's so important to have all the different vertical skills in a team. You need the best marketers, you need the best designers, the best scientists, the best everything.
Yeah.
It's so important to build the right connection amongst these people.
It's interesting what you say in terms of innovation takes time. We want to keep people for 5 or 10 years, not have 18 months and they get promoted to the next role sort of thing. I read something somewhere that the reason people stay in a job is whether they consider they have friends at work and the extent to which they laugh. And I just thought if you build a culture of, as you say, love and kindness and so on, you're much more likely to keep the people that have got all the knowledge and understanding, have failed and succeeded, that are going to help you create success.
Look, the longest study on happiness ever done, that started almost 100 years ago, shows that actually happiness, the first driver of happiness, the most important driver of happiness is relations.
Yeah.
So it's relations with family, friends, but obviously we spend the most of our time at work.
Yeah.
And so that's so important. Yeah. Actually, I closed the book talking about how to design happiness. And there are 3 dimensions. The first, and that are both personal, but applicable to the business world as well. The first one is investing in yourself. Defining your identity. We start when we're kids, trying to understand who we are in connection to others. At a certain point, we identify role models, and today we have influencers, and this is great. Yeah, learn from them, be inspired from them, but then mix everything, blend everything, and create your own identity. Your job becomes very important to build your own identity. It's also important to understand, though, that your job is not your identity, because you lose your job and your identity is gone. That's a mistake that many people do. So the balance, once again, in understanding how your job become your identity, but how to transcend the job, the company, the brand. Your identity is connected to that. I'm a designer, I'm a PepsiCo designer. I'm super grateful to the opportunity that PepsiCo gave me and is giving me today. But I also have theories that transcend the company and probably are building a lot of value to the company because of this. The second dimension is the love for the people around you, selfless love that you give and you receive back from your close community, friends, family, and therefore also colleagues. This is so important. I met so many people that stay in companies eventually that don't pay them very well, that are in very tough conditions, and we all are like, why are you staying there? And then you realize that they love the other people in the company. And then they love the third dimension. The third dimension is purpose. It is doing something bigger than you, something that transcends your personal interest. And once again, it sounds really noble. In reality, it's still about you. You arrive to the conclusion later in life, often when you start to feel that you're not going to be immortal. And so doing something that is bigger than you is a way to defeat death, to build memories in people that will remember you as a person kind to stranger, as a person that invented Apple or Virgin, as a person that did something that you left behind yourself. And so this purpose is really, really important, and give a purpose to your team. So creating an environment where your people in your company can express themselves, self-identity, find, good people around them, and then have the ability, they are empowered to dream and have a purpose and try to change the world in their scale, in their community. That's a secret recipe, not just for building value for your company. That's an afterthought, is a consequence, but to build happiness in these communities. And because these people are the people that live in society, live in the world, essentially you're building happiness in society, in the world.
Yeah. Now, a lot of people listening probably like you work in big companies, big organizations, and they want to create innovation and create a change. Now, you had a phrase I've not heard before, but in your book, which I absolutely love, which was fighting the dictatorship of normal. Can you explain what that is? Because I thought it was a brilliant encapsulation of probably what everyone feels when they're trying to innovate and what they feel like they're up against in the organization.
Look, society in general, forget corporations, society love the standardization, the normalization, the norm.
Yeah.
They love it because it's controllable. You are part of a mechanism, you are a cog in this mechanism, you have a role, and I'm going to control you. The problem is that the world around us keeps changing. It changes in society, your life, it's your personal life, everything. There are so many different variables, and it changes for companies. The difference between now and the past, that is changing at the speed of light. In the past, changes will take more time. So all of a sudden, you need to break the norm. You need to break that dictatorship of the norm and try to still be part of processes and, understand how to manage the norm and the standardization and the processes, but also have that flexibility, that agility to interpret the situation and change things. Yeah. But once again, we go back to balance. We go back to this ability to be part of a process, understand those platforms, but then also disrupt and change.
Because often the art is how you create the change. Because often, people like you and I our heads will be in the future, but we've got to bring the organization with us. So it's how you balance the two, isn't it? Like, long-term thinking, but get people there in steps and then bring everyone with you. To wrap up, right, I can't miss the opportunity to ask you about the fact that you rebranded Pepsi. Like, that must have been a huge kind of moment for you, taking an iconic brand with, such a history as Pepsi and rebranding it. So what were you trying to achieve through that rebrand?
Look, first of all, it was necessary. Pepsi is a brand that's been rebranding itself every 10, 15 years for its entire history. It's this idea of being timely, relevant to new generations and everything. A few things were changing in this specific moment. We live in a digital world, a new focus on sustainability, health and wellness, and therefore for us was a big, big focus on zero sugar. Yeah. And so we needed a different kind of identity that could serve all these strategic objectives. And then the previous redesign didn't have the energy that Pepsi used to have in the past. And so we were missing also that element. Now, it was not easy though. It was one of those proactive projects. We as a design team, we pitched this project to the organization, to the company. And I say it was not easy because me personally and us as a design team, we were really successful within the company, with our own credibility and everything. So a project like this is a risky project. It's a project that could go wrong so easily. When you redesign a brand that is known and loved all around the world, it's easy to go wrong. Yeah. And so it took a lot of courage to do it anyway. But we go back once again to the love for doing the right thing. We knew that we needed to do it, but the safe solution could have been not to do it. The truth is that often we perceive the lack of action as safe. In reality, is the worst thing you can do to yourself and to your company. Yeah. But the action implies risk as well. So personally, it was really exciting because there was all the adrenaline of dealing with an iconic brand that existed, was invented before any human being in this planet was ever born, because it's 126 years ago now, and hopefully probably will exist after every human being on the planet, will be gone. And so imagine the responsibility of doing something like this and the honor of being part of this.
The thing I loved about it is you seem to be inspired by the 1950s and 60s version of Pepsi. So you were kind of going back to the past, but the way you executed it was absolutely digital and modern and flexible, wasn't it? So I think that was a really clever way of respecting the history, but also unlocking it for the future kind of thing. That's a really clever balance of the two things.
Balance once again. You summarize it perfectly.
There we go. Well, maybe that's the perfect point to end then. So Mauro, thank you so much. It's been an absolute blast. This is one of those conversations that I know we just scratched the surface and we could have talked forever. There's 1,000 questions in my mind, but thank you. It's really energizing to talk to you and appreciate you giving us your time.
Thank you for having me. It was really inspiring also for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for listening or watching Uncensored CMO. I hope you enjoyed that. If you did, please do hit the subscribe button wherever you get your podcast. And if you're watching, hit subscribe there as well. I'd also love to get a review. Reviews make a big difference on other people discovering the show. So please do leave a review wherever you get your podcast. If you want to contact me, you can do. I'm over on X @UncensoredCMO or on LinkedIn, where I'm under my own name, John Evans. Thanks for listening and watching. I'll see you next time.